The banquet hall smelled like garlic bread, and the particular sourness of a cash bar running on its third hour. It was 7:52 p.m. on a Saturday in October, and I was sitting at a round table with a slice of birthday cake I hadn't touched, watching my father stand up, tap his fork against his water glass, and clear his throat for a toast. "To Marcus," he said, raising his glass toward my brother. "The only one of my kids who ever amounted to anything." Then, without missing a beat, he turned toward me, smiled the way you'd smile at a stray dog you felt sorry for, and added, "And to Simone, still figuring out what she does all day. But hey, we love her anyway." The table laughed. Actual laughter, glasses clinking, my Aunt Pauline wiping her eye like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. I smiled too. I picked up my fork. I ate a bite of cake. But here's what none of them knew. Sitting in that banquet hall in their rented suits, laughing at the daughter they'd spent 10 years calling jobless. I had a badge in my purse, a case file with 400 pages in it, and my brother's name was already in it before that toast ever left my father's mouth. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Simone, 36, a senior fraud investigator from Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is the story of what happens when you spend a decade mocking someone for having no job, and it turns out her job was building the case that ends yours. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, stay with me. Drop a comment and subscribe, because it only gets sharper from here. I was 13 when my brother Marcus, 16 at the time, wrecked our father's truck driving without a license, and my father's response was to buy him a used Mustang 8 months later, so he'd have something to be careful with. That same year, I brought home a 4.0 report card 2 semesters running, and the only acknowledgement I got was my mother saying, "Well, someone has to be the responsible one," in a tone that made responsibility sound like a consolation prize. That was the shape of things in our house. Marcus got the benefit of every doubt. I got the assumption of competence, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it means nobody ever checks on you, because you're fine, and nobody ever celebrates you, because you were just doing what you're supposed to do. I have a plaque somewhere in a box in my closet. Oklahoma State Honors Program, Criminal Justice Track, top of my graduating class, 2012. My parents didn't come to that ceremony. They came to Marcus's community college business seminar graduation, the same spring, a 2-day certificate program he never used for anything, and my mother cried through the whole thing. I didn't say anything then. I've never been someone who says much in the moment. I've always been someone who writes things down and waits. Dot here quote, says the part where I need you to understand something about my job, because it's the whole reason the next 10 years looked the way they did. I've spent my entire career in financial crimes investigation, first with the state, now with a regional bank's fraud unit, tracking elder scams, identity theft rings, and investment fraud. A meaningful part of that work, especially early in my career, required a low profile. I couldn't be the person at family gatherings talking about active casework, subpoenas, or wire intercepts. I especially couldn't be the person whose own family knew enough about what I did to accidentally mention it to the wrong person at the wrong church potluck, because more than once, the wrong person turned out to be someone connected to a case. So when my parents asked what I did for work, I gave vague answers. Something with banks. Boring desk stuff. I let the vagueness calcify over years, into an assumption that I didn't really have a career at all, that I was drifting. My mother started introducing me at events as our Simone. She's still finding her footing, which is a hell of a thing to hear at 31 years old, with a master's degree and a caseload of active federal referrals. Meanwhile, I was the one paying their bills. When my father needed a hip replacement 4 years ago, and his insurance denied the claim twice, I covered the $14,000 gap, wired directly to the hospital, so it wouldn't show up as coming from me on any statement they might see. When my mother's gallbladder surgery went sideways, and she needed 3 weeks of home care, I paid a private aide $8,400 out of pocket, rather than tell them I could afford it, because affording it would have required explaining how. When my father got sued by a former business associate over a dispute I later learned, professionally, involved shell companies I recognized the naming pattern of, I quietly paid $19,000 toward the settlement through my attorney, listed as an anonymous contribution, because I could not risk my name appearing on legal documents connected to a business associate I was, by then, already building a file on in an unrelated capacity. By the time of that birthday dinner, the running total hip surgery, home care, the settlement, 2 years of supplemental rent when my father's hours got cut, and a used car for my mother after hers was totaled, came to $61,000 even. And through every bit of it, they thought I was unemployed. At a church potluck 2 years ago, Pastor Ellis asked, gently, if I needed help getting back on my feet, and my mother patted my hand and said, "We're just praying for her. She'll find her way." I sat there with $61,000 of receipts in a folder on my laptop and said, "Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate that," because saying anything else would have meant explaining things I legally could not explain yet. I want to be honest with you. It cost me something, every single time. Not the money. The money I could manage. What cost me was watching people I loved describe me, publicly, as a cautionary tale, while I sat there holding the actual truth like a stone in my pocket. The birthday dinner in October wasn't even supposed to be about me specifically. It was a combined celebration, my birthday, and my father's retirement from the school district. 22 family members and friends, packed into a banquet hall my mother had rented for the occasion. I'd shown up straight from a 12-hour surveillance shift, tired in the specific way that makes you quiet instead of irritable. The toast happened 40 minutes in. To Marcus, the only one of my kids who ever amounted to anything. Then the turn toward me, still figuring out what she does all day. But hey, we love her anyway. And the table laughing, actual, open laughter. My Aunt Pauline's the loudest. Nobody at that table said a word in my defense. Not my mother, who sat beside my father nodding along. Not my cousin Deja, who I'd helped move apartments twice. Not even Marcus, who at minimum could have redirected the joke, and instead raised his glass along with everyone else, grinning like he'd been personally complimented by the comparison. I finished my cake. I folded my napkin in half, then in half again, the way I do when I'm giving my hands something precise to do, while my mind goes somewhere else. I stood up, thanked my mother for the dinner, told my father congratulations on the retirement, and left. No slammed door. There wasn't one, just the hotel's revolving glass entrance turning slow and silent behind me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Then I opened my laptop, still in the driver's seat, and pulled up a case file I'd been building for 8 months. I need to explain the case, because this is where the story stops being about hurt feelings and starts being about my actual job. For 8 months, I'd been investigating an elder fraud operation targeting retirees across 3 counties. Fake, guaranteed return investment products sold through in-person seminars at churches, community centers, and senior groups. Real people had lost real money. One woman, Loretta Voss, 78, had lost $43,000 of her late husband's pension to it. I'd interviewed her twice. I still have the recording of her asking me, very quietly, whether she'd ever get any of it back. The lead entity behind the seminars operated under a name I won't say here for legal reasons, but I will tell you that 8 months into my investigation, cross-referencing business filings, I found the registered agent's name, Marcus, my brother's investment consulting business, the same one that had gotten him sued once already. The debt I'd quietly settled without ever fully understanding what it was for was the operating entity behind the seminars I'd spent 8 months building a federal case against. I sat with that for exactly as long as my job required me to, which was not long, because the job doesn't leave room for sitting with things. I severed every remaining informal financial tie I had left with my parents that week. I didn't cancel anything dramatically, because there was nothing left to cancel. I simply stopped answering when my mother texted asking if I could help out with a cable bill, and I let that silence be its own kind of answer. I documented my own conflict of interest formally with my supervisor, in writing, the same day I confirmed the connection, because that's the procedure, and because I was not going to let a family dinner compromise a federal case. Word travels fast in a family that doesn't have much else to talk about. Within 2 weeks, the story circulating at church and among relatives was that I'd stormed out of my own birthday dinner over nothing. Proof, as my mother put it to Pauline, that I'd always had a chip on her shoulder about Marcus. Nobody mentioned the toast. The toast disappeared from the retelling entirely, the way the cruel line always does, once the crier becomes the story. I didn't correct any of it. I didn't post anything, didn't call Pauline, didn't send my mother a single text defending myself. What I did instead was open a case log, separate from the fraud file, this one just for me, and start writing down dates, dollar amounts, and receipts for every dollar I'd sent my parents over 10 years, cross-referenced against every public comment either of them had made about my unemployment. I wasn't building it for revenge. I was building it because, professionally, I know that the truth without documentation is just an opinion, and I have never once in my career walked into a room with just an opinion. My supervisor, Dana, noticed how quiet I'd gotten that month. When I finally told her the personal side of it, not the case details, just the family shape of it, she didn't say, "That's terrible." She said, "Does Ruiz know the registered agent is your brother?" Ruiz was the detective I'd been partnered with on the Elder Fraud Task Force for the last 5 months, a methodical guy who chewed the same brand of gum through every stakeout we'd ever run together. When I told him about Marcus, he didn't blink. "Doesn't change the case," he said. "Changes how careful we both need to be about you touching it directly." What it did change was how I understood the last 10 years. That business associate lawsuit I'd quietly paid $19,000 to settle without asking questions. Ruiz pulled the old civil filing and confirmed gently that the associate suing Marcus at the time had been an early, angrier version of exactly the same scheme. Someone who'd figured out the fraud and sued instead of staying quiet, and who Marcus had settled out of court to keep buried. I'd paid to bury my own brother's first attempt at this. And there was more. Going back through old case notes with Ruiz's help, I found that Loretta Voss, the woman who'd lost $43,000, attended the same church as my parents. She'd told me, in our second interview, that a friend of a friend had recommended the seminar to her, someone she trusted, because they'd known her family for years. I hadn't pressed her on the name at the time. When I finally did, gently, over the phone, she said it was Sheila, my mother. My mother hadn't known what the seminars actually were. I believe that. She's careless, not cruel, and there's a difference, even if the outcome for Loretta wasn't. But she had, unknowingly, been the connective tissue between her own son's fraud and her own church friend's life savings, while telling everyone at that same church that her actual daughter, the one who'd have recognized the scheme in about 4 minutes flat, was the family disappointment. I sat with Loretta's name in that file for a long time. What came next wasn't emotional. It was procedural, because that's the only register I trust myself in when the stakes are this real. Dana formally reassigned lead role on the case to Ruiz, keeping me on in a supporting analyst capacity only, fully documented, fully compliant, to avoid any conflict of interest challenge later in court. I spent 6 weeks building out the financial trail. 11 victims identified. Total losses of $286,000. Wire transfers traced through 4 shell accounts, one of which had paid for the Mustang my father bought Marcus back when he was 16. A detail I noted in the file with zero commentary. The way you note anything, because that's the job. Marcus found out he was under investigation before the arrest, the way people usually do. A subpoena to a business partner tends to travel. He called me 11 times over 2 days. I answered the 12th. "You did this," he said. Not a question. "I built a case against a business defrauding retirees," I said. "I didn't know it was yours until month 6. That's in the file, too." "You could have warned me," he said. "You're my sister." "I've been your sister for 36 years, I said. "I've also been paying Mom and Dad's medical bills for 10 of them, while everyone called me jobless. I think I get to be exactly one thing right now, and it's the thing I actually am." I hung up before it turned into the kind of call where he'd start working the old angles. Guilt, family loyalty, the particular emotional shorthand siblings develop over decades. I wasn't willing to let 10 years of being underestimated get spent on a phone call I already knew the shape of. The bank, as part of a broader community outreach initiative, had already scheduled a fraud awareness town hall at my parents' own church for the following month, planned 4 months earlier, well before any of this connected back to Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on Ruiz when we realized the guest financial expert slot, arranged separately, through the church's community board, without our knowledge until 2 weeks out, had been filled by my brother, still unaware at that point how close the walls had already closed in. I wasn't originally slated to speak. Dana added me back in an official analyst capacity, once the arrest warrant was already signed and the timing lined up. The arrest would happen the same week, and the bank wanted an investigator present to field community questions afterward, regardless of who that investigator turned out to be related to. The hall was full, 60, maybe 70 people, folding chairs in church basement rows. My parents near the front, Pauline beside them. Marcus stood at the podium in a blazer, mid-sentence about recognizing red flags in investment offers, when two plainclothes officers approached the side of the stage. Ruiz was one of them. He didn't cuff Marcus at the podium. There's a process, and Ruiz followed it, walking him gently toward the side exit while reading him his rights, at a volume meant to be heard by exactly the people who needed to hear it, and no louder. The room did the math out loud, in real time, whispers rippling backward through the folding chairs. My mother stood up, white-faced. "Simone," she said, "what is happening? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything to him," I said, standing at the back where I'd been quietly positioned the whole talk. "I built a case against a fraud ring that stole $286,000 from people in this room, including Loretta." I nodded toward her, 3 rows up, hands folded in her lap. It turned out the ring was Marcus's. I found that out in month 6 of an 8-month investigation. I've been an investigator for 11 years. I've been paying your medical bills for 10 of them. Both of those things were true the whole time you called me jobless. My father, beside her, said nothing. Pauline, for once, said nothing either. Marcus, being walked toward the door, turned back and said loud enough for the room, "You always thought you were better than me." It wasn't a denial. It was the same entitled reflex he'd had his entire life, and it landed, in that basement, as exactly what it was. Marcus was indicted on 11 counts of wire fraud and securities fraud within 6 weeks. He pled to a reduced set of charges 8 months later, 3 years. Restitution ordered at $286,000, most of which, given his finances, will likely never be fully repaid, though Loretta and one other victim have received partial payments through a restitution fund. His consulting license, such as it was, is permanently revoked. My parents standing at the church didn't survive the fallout the way they'd hoped. My mother, though never charged with anything, she genuinely hadn't known, spent months fielding quiet, awkward distance from people she'd known for 20 years, the specific social cost of having been, even innocently, the bridge between a predator and his victim. My father's retirement, the thing the banquet dinner had partly celebrated, got quietly overshadowed in every conversation that followed by one single question. "Did you know?" He didn't either. But we didn't know doesn't undo 10 years of calling the person who did know a disappointment. As for me, Dana put me up for a regional commendation for the elder fraud case, which I received in March. The case closed with the highest conviction count our unit had seen in 3 years. Loretta Voss sent me a card. Not a client thank you. An actual card, handwritten, that said she was glad someone had finally listened. I keep it in the same box as that honors program plaque from 2012, the one nobody came to see me receive. It's been almost a year now. My parents and I speak, carefully, mostly about small things. My father's garden, my mother's new part-time volunteer work at a different congregation, one that didn't watch her son get walked out of a basement in handcuffs. We haven't fully repaired it. I'm not sure fully is the right goal anymore. I think what we're building instead is something more honest than what we had, which is its own kind of progress. I took that old plaque out of the box a few months ago and finally hung it in my office, next to the commendation. 2 pieces of paper, 11 years apart, both proof of the same thing. I was never jobless. I was just never asked. Being underestimated by your own family doesn't mean you were wrong about who you are. It just means they weren't paying attention. If you've ever spent years being quietly written off by the people who were supposed to know you best, you already know that the truth doesn't need you to defend it loudly. It just needs you to keep doing the work until the record speaks for itself. If this one hit close to home, share it with someone who's ever been called the one who never amounted to anything. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have said in that banquet hall. And if you haven't already, subscribe. There's more where this came from.